Hello, my blade-loving friends, and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about one of the major comparisons that is made about fencing, which is that fencing is like chess. Now, at its base, it's easy to see why the comparison exists between the sport and the board game, but I think it is important to see how far the comparison goes, not only in how the game is played, but the mental state of the competitors as well. When we are saying that fencing is like chess, we are basically saying that, like in chess, a fencer is trying to trick their opponent into falling into their personal traps. A simple example would be that in chess, I might put a piece out on the board so that it baits my opponent into taking the piece, and then we end up having an exchange where they end up losing more resources than I do. We are both trying to do this until victory is achieved, and the outcome is basically who can outsmart the other one enough to get to the king and therefore win the match. In this representation of fencing, the whole fencing match is compared to a whole game of chess, meaning that getting the king is like getting your 15th point and winning the match. While I think that this is a good comparison for fencing and chess, I tend to think that the comparison could be much deeper than this version. Let's say that you're encountering another fencer for the first time, and you have never seen them fence. In your mind, you have no idea how they fence, and they're a complete blank slate to you, and possibly you are to them too. This would be comparable to the chessboard starting position where everything is aligned perfectly, nothing has been moved, like this board right here. We are going to say that the pieces on the board are going to be your skills and techniques that you have available to use in the match. An intermediate fencer will know all the general fencing moves and therefore assume that they are all possible, and with that, you'll have the basic board being employed. From there, the fencers begin and information starts to be exchanged. The fencers start seeing how the other likes to move, how they hold their stance, the parries they like to use, their reaction time, how aggressive or defensive they are, how much blade contact they like, and if they have any good or bad habits. All these little bits of information are pieces on the chessboard moving around. If someone is baiting their opponent or giving false information, then that is similar to setting up a trap on a chessboard. If a trap ends up in a checkmate, that would be similar to a trap in a fencing match leading to a touch. If that doesn't end up in a touch, but rather the fencers keep fencing, then that information is like a chess piece on the board getting eaten up or moved around. The fencers evaluate what worked and what didn't work, and in turn eliminate certain options in their head, which would be similar to eating up pieces on the board. And the moves that the fencers evaluate are going to be useful would be the same as the pieces on the chessboard that stay alive rather than get eaten up. Not only that, but because of the actions that are going on, other pieces on the board might move around as well, as the fencers' assumptions about their opponents change. For example, if my opponent doesn't like blade contact, I can feel safe in assuming that they won't use a beat attack or an attack that grabs the blade as it enters. Since I think those options are less likely, on the chessboard that would be like the pieces representing the moves being in a non-threatening position on the board. They could maybe do something, but if they did, it would take a lot more work for them to be threatening, and if they end up not being good tools, they would just be eaten up and no longer be a threat to me. Once a point is earned through the back and forth of information, the fencers get back to the starting lines and get ready for the next point. This time, the chessboard does not reset to the normal starting position like you see here. The pieces are now reset on the board according to the information and the assumptions that the fencers now have. Now at this point, the fencers have an idea of how they see the other fencer and themselves, and in turn they each have a mental chessboard based on what they think they know. From the start of that point and all the points that follow, they are trying to get to the king, which is equal to getting a point, and the board changes slightly or dramatically based on what happened in the previous point. Sometimes the point might take a while to achieve, and that is similar to a lot of exchanges happening and information being shared, and other times the point might happen in 2 moves for the fencer, and that's because the other fencer made a bad judgment call on what they were going to do, and in turn, the point ended quickly. It would look like one of those chess matches where someone loses in 2 or 3 moves, and in a fencing match, it would look like someone getting a point in 2 or 3 seconds immediately after the en garde pré-allé. Basically, both on the chessboard and on the fencing strip, the fencer made a false assumption and ended up paying for it really quickly. The mental state of the fencer also affects the board and how the pieces move around. If my opponent is upset, then their anger changes how they act. Some people process anger better than others, but most people fall to anger and in turn don't see what's happening clearly. Fencing wise, they'll make foolish choices, such as rushing in without a plan. On a chessboard, it would be like flinging your pieces towards your opponent without thinking of the consequences of what you're doing. Some might just want to get their opponent so bad that they forget about all the tools, techniques, and options available to them, and they really tunnel vision on certain moves that just won't work. This makes them super predictable, and on a chessboard, it would be like only trying to win using 3 pieces when you have your whole set of pieces available to you to try and win the match. Some people get extremely focused when they get angry, and those people turn that anger into motivation and creativity. People like this do not ignore their pieces. Rather, they become more effective with them, more aggressive with them, yet at the same time, not reckless. The scariest fencer to face in regards to how they use the board are those fencers who adapt extremely well. The visual on the chessboard would be that you have maneuvered yourself so well that on the chessboard it favors you, and in turn you end up getting a point. This is where the fencer who can adapt really well becomes extremely scary. There are people that can adapt so well that they can take this scenario that you've made and reverse it. It would usually happen after a point has been made and the board resets in your favor because of all the work you put in the last point. But somehow they have to find a way out. An adaptable fencer would change the way they fence completely in a way that matches what you are doing and get a point in a way that was not even similar to what they were doing before. On the chessboard, it would look like between points, they completely rearranged the board so it doesn't look anything like what you would assume initially. They saw what you did, and in turn, they understood it. The next turn, they did something completely different that destroys your setup. That is not the chessboard that you had in your head, but it is the one that they had in their mental chessboard, and now you have to find out what they think is happening and adapt accordingly. This all has to be done before the next point, or else you don't understand what's happening, and in turn, they can get an easy point off you. Knowing about how these mental boards change and can adapt means that anybody you have seen fence or you have fence, you have a mental board in your mind about how they function. So if you're fencing against someone that you've fenced against before or seen, you already have assumptions in your head. So before the first point even starts, it's not a blank slate board. It's a completely constructed board that you've made based on your own assumptions of how they fence and how you should fence with them. If it's someone that you've fenced with for years, whether it be at tournaments or in your fencing club, then your board probably becomes more and more accurate and more on point. For my fencers out there, I'm sure you can think of one person that you've fenced with for years that you know exactly how the match is going to go, give or take a few points, and it's just about who is going to outsmart the other one, knowing all the information in its completion. All the moves are on the table, everybody knows everything. It's just now who can outsmart the other one and what's the state, the mental state of the person. I hope this was a coherent explanation of why fencing is physical chess. Basically, the fact is, everything that you do on a chessboard, a fencer is doing in their mind, and in turn using their body to make that mental image a reality. You take those elements from chess and then you add the fact that there's a physical aspect. So fatigue comes into play, muscle soreness, injuries, all those type of things add to the board. Adding to the aspect of the board also changes every point. So you have to get 15 points. So there's so many chances for the board to completely rearrange itself. And that adds to a lot of the fun of doing fencing. You're not just completing a task, you're completing a task several times with a new challenge every time you do the challenge. Either way, I hope you liked the video. I hope it was clear enough. And if not, ask me questions down below. I have no problem answering questions. Be sure to subscribe if you like this type of content. I'll be talking about fencing a lot more and anything sword related. You'll see if you follow. It's all good. Anyway, have a good one.